Before we dive in, I would love to hear a little bit about your journey. So what initially sparked your interest in changing people's lives?
My whole journey with NLP, which goes back to 1975 at University of California at Santa Cruz, when I walked into a linguistics class that was being given by John Grinder, who was a linguistics professor at University of California at Santa Cruz. And so he and Bandler had just finished writing and publishing their first book, which was The Structure of Magic, Volume 1. And John taught us basically, the foundations of the NLP meta model. And it was one of the first really practical things I'd ever learned in school. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 1960s and 1950s, 60s, 70s. And in those days, that was very much, how would I say, there was a whole sense of wanting to, that you could do whatever you wanted and you could make a better world. It's the same time that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were starting Apple, and the same, almost just a few miles away. So there was really this sense that, you could make a difference in the world. Taking this class with John Grinder, I realized right away, because they had been modeling these, effective therapists. And I realized that I could, just with that background, with this meta model, I could really make a difference in people's lives. And I didn't have to have whatever 20 years of training as a psychiatrist or something. You just needed to know, this technology, And then I think for me, it was very clear and very exciting what they were saying about that the key of any kind of change was being able to enrich somebody's inner map or inner model of the world. So as a 19-year-old, I was completely fascinated and began to utilize putting into practice what they taught us, and I could see it was making a difference. So that was sort of what got me started. And then Bandler and Grinder were doing these weekly groups up at this property that they were on. And so I started going to those groups and became part of they're called the meta groups, and became part of that. And yeah, so I mean that was the start.
So your first book, Sleight of Mouth, was published in 1999.
Yes.
How come it took you 25 years for the second book to come out? Is there a particular reason or a special meaning that you published the second one years later? Yeah.
I'd always intended to publish a second one, but I had a lot of other books I was writing as well. There was a lot of other things going on, and I wanted to, for me, the whole idea of the second book was to make it very practical. I've been collecting material for that second book for years. But I think what really, kind of stimulated me to write it now in this particular time is because I think we are, sort of more and more in entering into a sleight of mouth world, meaning that, if you take what's happening with social media, where people are basically just getting words and words and words and words and building beliefs based on just other words. And I thought this is so important to be able to have a technology. Why now is that our world, it really needs it. And we can see that there's more and more divisiveness taking place. We can see that there is more and more people getting caught up in, conspiracy theories, in, things that are essentially what we would call sleight of mouth. It's all worlds created by words rather than actual experiences. And so my goal in writing it now was to be able to try to provide people with a kind of you might say, a virus protection software like you would get for your computer, so that there's all these possible thought viruses, these limiting beliefs that are going around. And how do you know which ones to choose? How do you know which ones to take on? And a lot of times we already have taken some on unconsciously, and it's helpful to have a way to be able to, first of all, recognize that, and then secondly, be able to do something about it, to be able to, transform that.
So for someone who hasn't heard of NLP or hasn't heard of sleight of mouth, how would you explain the title of the book? What is sleight of mouth?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So sleight of mouth is it's a play on words. There's an English word, sleight of hand, which is a type of magic that you do with a card magician will take one card and suddenly it turns into another, or you pull a rabbit out of a hat, or you saw somebody in half, and so you want to try to create an illusion, but you're doing it through a certain kind of dexterity. So the term sleight in sleight of mouth actually means to be dexterous, to be cunning. And so what it's basically saying is that you're doing this kind of magic with words, as opposed to by manually manipulating something. You're taking something that appears one way, and suddenly it's like by magic it appears another way. Originally, that Richard Bandler was doing what he called sleight of mind. And sleight of mind was a similar kind of idea that your mind can play tricks, and you can then learn how to use those tricks or to shift those perspectives. And for me, I'd always been interested in, modeling how people, historical people, were able to, make big changes in the world. It was, but from a neuro-linguistic perspective, understanding what people like Socrates were able to do, or Jesus, or others who clearly, changed people's lives and changed the world through the power of the word. And for me, there was something more than just the meta model going on. There was these other kinds of ways of using words, and of course we often call them verbal reframes. You're reframing through language somebody's perspective. So again, the idea of the title is, it's alluding to this idea of the power of the word and the magic of language, and how language can completely change our perspective of of what's going on in the external reality. It can take something that seems bad and make it seem good. It can take something that seems good and suddenly make it seem bad, just by the way that you talk about it. And it seemed to me to be important to be able to, identify what were some of the ways that, we do that, and that it has been done through history.
In the first book, you also speak about your mother. So she
Yes.
was initially she was given only 6 months to live after her breast cancer diagnosis.
Yeah.
However, she surpassed this prognosis significantly, living for 70 years after this diagnosis. And this remarkable extension of her life is often cited as a testament to the impact of positive mindset, psychological support,
Sure.
and also the application of techniques like sleight of mouth patterns.
Let's go back and just, clarify that sleight of mouth patterns are essentially about language at the level of beliefs and belief systems. So we use language for a lot of different things. We can use language I can give you my telephone number or something, but that's not going to change your belief, right? That's not about beliefs. So one of the first key things is that sleight of mouth is about being able to use language as a way to either create or to, re-examine certain beliefs. So in this case with my mother, when she was given this diagnosis, this is, any diagnosis is based on a certain beliefs and belief systems. I mean, science itself is a kind of a belief system. It says, this is how you know what's true. There's this means this means this. It's all about cause and effect. And so the key in this case with my mother was that the doctors were saying that there wasn't anything they could do for her medically. And of course, this prognosis of months, wasn't even necessarily as many as 6 months, that this was a recurrence. She'd had breast cancer once before, and in less than 2 years, it had come back and had spread throughout her body. So from a medical perspective, the doctors are saying, wow, look, it's obvious. This is a fast-growing, fast-spreading cancer. It wasn't here, only a couple of years ago. Now it's everywhere. So, if you project forward based on what's happened in the last 2 years, it makes sense that there's going to be, there's only a few months left. But, of course, that's assuming that everything stays the same and that it's only a purely physical thing. So the thing that, I decided to do was say, okay, so the medicine can't do anything. Let's find out. I was very engaged in NLP. Let's see if NLP can make a difference. And again, in those days, we had a very strong belief that NLP, it was before NLP became world famous, but we believed this could really make a difference. So that's when I started, just doing some basic things with my mother about, we knew that that visualization could make a difference in people's, physiology. And we were even using NLP from the very beginning. We used it to work with physical things, but nobody had ever specifically worked with cancer before. We were just, so this was an exploration. And what became obvious, it was right away, was in my mother's case, she had kind of really got caught in this belief system that this was going to sort of play out in a certain way. And so when I was asking her, what to look at the future and see what kind of goals she might have, her first response was, well, I don't have a future, so that's already where there's a belief involved. So a first part of sleight of mouth would be something like saying, well, okay, we don't know how long you're going to live. Maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's 6 days, maybe it's 6 years. We don't know. But how do you want to live those 6 years, right? So those 6 years or 6 weeks or 6 hours, whatever it is. So now what you're doing is you're reframing it. You're taking it out of this kind of fixed time perspective. So that's already a shift. So what would make it worth, to live and live fully, to actually live those times instead of just start preparing to die or something. So that's already a first shift. We started saying, okay, what beliefs would you need in order to have the shift? And I would say, just the basic idea here is that when my mother first got breast cancer the first time, she just wanted her old life back as quickly as possible, right? So that's all I want. I want to get rid of this so I can have my old life back. It makes sense in a way, but she didn't change anything, right? She just had a radical mastectomy. Done. The doctors gave her old life back. When she got to the second time, it became obvious that the old life is now over, right? But now, does that mean my whole life is over? Now, the old life is over. And in fact, the old life might be something that was contributing to what was happening anyway. So now we're starting to this process of let's engineer a new life. What and what values guide that life? What beliefs guide that life? And just as another example, she started to have this sense of a way that she could be, that's this life that she could have. She began to become very excited. But then there was this, and this was I think a key part of where you see where there's this issue of beliefs and sleight of mouth. Suddenly there was this very strong, like an unconscious reaction, just kind of shutting down. That was something like, no, no, not for you. You cannot have that life. It's not for you. So we think that's interesting. Let's bring some attention there. Let's find out what that's about. And this is the way that beliefs work. And that's, in fact, it's important to know about sleight of mouth. People are not always going to just say the belief. They don't even know what the belief is, when we talk about a thought virus. So you have to bring awareness there. And in fact, before any words came, my mother had an image of her own mother and her older sister, who had both died of breast cancer, metastatic breast cancer. It was, okay, that's interesting. What these images are about. Well, then the beliefs started to come out. Okay, they were in my mother's case, they're her role models. They're the people that, this is what happens to the women in my family. Who am I to break the mold? Who am I to be different? In fact, sort of the belief was that it would in fact be almost disloyal if she got to live this life and they didn't, right? And so there's where you get this very interesting notion of, okay, loyalty is an important value, but what are your beliefs about it? And so here's where the sleight of mouth comes in, right? So she's saying, yeah, there's this belief that's a very powerful identity and beyond belief, right? It's not just a belief like, is this nice or not nice? It's, this is about, your destiny, your life, your legacy, your heritage. And so the shift was, I said, well, look, I understand that loyalty is very important. But I noticed that you're only thinking about loyalty looking backwards in the past. I think you should look at least as far into the future as you are to the past to see your daughter, my sister, and your potential grandchildren, your daughter's daughters. They're looking at you to see how they should be, the way that you're looking at your mother. Do you want them to be loyal to you by dying of metastatic breast cancer? Is that what you would want? And of course, she said, no, I would never want that. I would want them to live their life fully. Oh, well, guess what? What are you going to pass down? You're the role model. So now, all of a sudden, and this is the power of sleight of mouth, right? This thing that's holding you back powerfully, and maybe even, is going to create this place where you give up. Suddenly, all of that energy gets directed to making a complete life change. And that's when, my mother that was a big moment where she realized, okay, it's not just about me, and I'm not the end of this chain. I'm the beginning of another chain. And so that's when she really, began to make this commitment to have a new life. When she first got this diagnosis, it was the worst thing in her life that had ever happened. It's the worst thing that ever happened. After she made this change, and then she lived another 18 years, I think it was, had a remarkable recovery to the surprise of her doctors, etc. But she would look back and say, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. She said, I was lucky. I got 2 lives. Most people only get 1. He said, and my second life was so much better than the first because it was my life. So now this is the key to this idea of sleight of mouth, sleight of mind, right? That a shift in perspective can change everything, right? It can change your life, literally. And that's ultimately what, sleight of mouth is about. And what ultimate goal would be is, let's do something life-changing.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us, Robert. I'm still curious in this area. Is there a particular sleight of mouth pattern that you have used to help your mother, and also there are so many people suffering with not only with cancer, with different disease all over the world today, and how come medical doctors don't use sleight of mouth patterns with their patients more to help them?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, there's several questions in your question, but for this last one, of course, medical doctors aren't trained to use language. They're trained, they're in their view, health is mechanical, right? It's not, what you say doesn't matter. It's like the ghost. They say, they say the ghost in the machine, right? That ghost can't make any difference. What you think is going to make any difference. As far as your first question, is there a particular one? Not necessarily. I don't think so. I think, I don't think that cancer itself is created by a particular sort of a single limiting belief. So the key is that belief can, again, one of the fundamental principles of NLP in general, but also of sleight of mouth, is that energy follows attention, right? Energy flows where attention goes. Where do you need to put your energy in order to heal something? We know that from the placebo effect, that belief can have a tremendous impact on health and healing. That's actually also one of the things that got me very interested in working with beliefs, and then, of course, tangentially or parallel, then sleight of mouth, which is about the language, how language influences beliefs. But with a placebo effect, somebody can take a medication that actually has no drugs in it, but because they believe it's going to make a difference, it can make tremendous differences. Plus every drug has to be tested against placebos, and placebos work for pretty much anything that they treat. They even have these placebo side effects. Which is one of my favorite examples. Is they gave a group of women who had breast cancer placebo chemotherapy. So there's no drug in it at all, right? They're given this treatment. And a third of the women in the study lost all of their hair. So you can actually this also shows that your belief is not only, it can cut both ways, right? Yes, I think it's going to help me, but it's also going to hurt me, right? My hair is going to fall out. So one of the things we know is that beliefs have tremendous influence. They're not the only cause, but they certainly have influence. And sometimes they're a difference that makes the difference. In traditional medicine, you treat the disease, right? So if somebody has breast cancer, you give them a particular regime of chemotherapy. Doesn't matter how old they are, doesn't matter how tall they are, it doesn't matter what their diet is. You give every single person who has the same, diagnosis, the same treatment. Now, the shift of mindset, and I think this is also the shift of in NLP and the sleight of mouth, is you don't treat the disease. What you're treating is the patient. And each and every patient is completely unique. You can't give the same treatment. This is what I learned from Milton Erickson, right? He never did the same thing twice with any two patients because they're different. You're not the same person. And so I think one of the reasons that this is not being used as much as it could yet is that there first has to be this fundamental shift in mindset, that it's not about the disease, it's about the unique individual. And then that's where something like the sleight of mouth, and that's why I say it, I don't know that you could say there's one particular sleight of mouth pattern. It's going to depend on that person. And I think this is the kind of mindset that's necessary to be able to do these things effectively, because it's not about a kind of a reaction to a symptom. It's about, working with an incredible, dynamic, magical system in a way. That's where the magic is.
I want to go back to the books.
Okay.
So volume 2, would you say is an upgrade? So what is the difference between Sleight of Mouth Volume 1 and Advanced Sleight of Mouth Volume 2?
So first of all, the whole idea of Sleight of Mouth 2 is that it's intended to be more about application, more practical. The other thing is that after 25 years of having, been working with, teaching, using Sleight of Mouth, I wanted to be able to, define these patterns more clearly. So one of the keys in Volume 2 is we're saying that sleight of mouth is not just a kind of a verbal recipe. It's actually, each pattern is a product of a mindset. So, you start by, you don't start with words, you actually start by shifting your way of thinking. So each pattern is a different way of thinking. It's a different way of looking at the same reality. It's a different filter. It's through language, you're going to create a new filter. Like my example with my mother, right? You're looking in the past, you want to look to the future. So, it's suddenly expanding the map of the world. And I think the thing that Bandler and Grinder said from the very beginning was change comes naturally when your map of the world is expanded, when it's enriched. And so what I wanted to do first with, Slide of Mouth 2 was give more examples, historical examples. So there's historical examples in each of how each pattern was used by some famous person in history, how Milton Erickson used it in his, hypnotherapeutic approach. Here's not only the pattern, but here's the mindset that goes with that pattern, and that's usually driven by a question. So by answering the question is how you're actually doing the sleight of mouth. So, or by posing the question. In the case of my mother, I didn't tell her something. I asked her a question about, loyalty is important. Is this the loyalty that you want your own daughter to have to you? Do you want that to be the same? I'm not saying something. I'm not attacking the belief. You're suddenly expanding these possibilities. Now, the other thing then that is key in volume 2 is so I go over explicitly what are the principles behind sleight of mouth, what are the skills to use it effectively. Then you have the patterns, right? The patterns themselves are patterns that, like anything else, they can be used, misused, they can be used poorly, they can be used superficially, right? So if you want to use them well, there's certain principles you need to understand. Then there's certain skills that you need to use with them. I mean, for example, having rapport helps a lot. The key is there's what I call the strategies of sleight of mouth. So the strategies would mean, okay, if you take what some of these people in history did with the language, sometimes they're using sleight of mouth to motivate somebody to do something risky. Sometimes you're using sleight of mouth to shift somebody's perception dramatically of a particular situation. Sometimes you're using sleight of mouth to just examine, think critically about a belief. So one of the things I am doing is by taking sort of modeling some of the key figures that I actually, was studying myself that could be, sort of famous examples. I use a couple of examples from Shakespeare, which even though they're fictional, and so saying, okay, this idea of a strategy then is rather than just use one sleight of mouth pattern or another one, or sort of do it by trial and error, or sometimes I say trial and horror. You want to say, okay, I might actually want to use a series, this particular series, and I'm starting here with this pattern. I might repeat that several times. Then I'm going to go to this other one as a result of that, because this is going to output something that then I can take and, go to some other pattern with. So that I think is an important part of it, is that it's saying, and this all goes back to this idea that sleight of mouth is not just about verbal recipes, verbal responses. It's about using language strategically in order to be able to create a certain shift of mindset. And that means you have to know where to go. So I would say the other thing that I bring in Sleight of Mouth 2 are the patterns of genius. So I'm saying, okay, if I take these patterns, the sleight of mouth patterns, and I use them through these filters or these strategies of genius, what kind of results do you get? And that's where I think it becomes really interesting, because now you're realizing, okay, I'm using these patterns for a certain purpose in order to, create a better world, and a whole new possibility.
For someone who might not know NLP and is thinking, what are these patterns especially valuable for? What are their
Yeah.
main purpose? How can an average person in everyday situation use sleight of mouth patterns in business or in sales? How can
Sure.
they be used there?
Sure. I think the first thing to realize is that sleight of mouth patterns are especially important whenever it comes to beliefs. So I think we live most of our lives, with beliefs. If somebody's going to buy something, they have to believe that it's valuable. If you're in business and you want to grow your business, you have to believe that it's possible. Beliefs are basically how would I say, they are the foundation of our lives. One application of it is it's a little bit like computer virus software, malware detection. So at least you go, hey, if somebody's saying something to me, whether it's political, whether it's health related, like my mother's case, etc., can I recognize when something is potentially not going to be helpful to me and filter that out? Number two, okay, let's say I want to, have some way of being able to influence my own beliefs or beliefs of somebody else. This is the whole idea of conversational belief change. And knowing these patterns is how you would be able to, first of all, you'll be much more persuasive. I mean, it's the patterns of persuasion. Persuasive about anything you want to be persuasive about. Secondly, you are also much more protected against sort of being taken advantage of, or you influenced in a negative way by somebody else. So I think these patterns are, you hear them every day in every conversation, because people are going to express a belief about something, and it's good to know, well, what are the beliefs that this is actually, based upon? And if somebody says, well, this is not a belief system, they're lying, because it can't not be. Everything is based on a belief system. And I think this is an important part of sleight of mouth. It doesn't necessarily say that this belief is real or true. We say in NLP, the map is never the territory. The map is not the territory. But the question is, where is that map going to lead me? And is that where I want to go? So it helps you to be much, much, much more clear about, everything that in your life. It helps you to make better choices. It helps you to be, again, more influential.
Besides limiting beliefs, and we talk about quite a lot about them, where else or what else are sleight of mouth patterns useful for?
Well, they're all about beliefs. So instead of limiting beliefs, of course, they're about empowering beliefs, and they're about what kind of beliefs are going to make a good life, a healthy life, a successful life. What if you picked 3 beliefs that, if you had them and you really believed them, would totally change your life? And why don't you believe them? Or pick 3 of, in NLP, we often talk about 7 plus or minus 2, right? 7 plus or minus 2 beliefs that, if people in the world had them, you would have a completely different world, a healthier world. What would be those beliefs? And then what stops people from having them? And I think, that's key then, is, again, sleight of mouth is going to give you the know-how to be able to design your life better, right? For most people, they don't even, one of the interesting things is most people don't even know that it's a belief. I'll have somebody who says, oh, I can't do this because, and I go, wow, that's a limiting belief. And they go, well, that's not a belief. That is how it is, right? So most people don't even realize they're living in this ocean of belief because they're unconscious to it. So I think one of the keys, and one of the important things about sleight of mouth is bringing awareness to the fact that we live in an ocean of beliefs. Which beliefs are serving us? They may have served us in the past, but they're no longer, helpful. And it's not because it's a good belief or a bad belief. It's just it no longer fits for who we are. So I think it's not, you're right that it's not just about limiting beliefs. In fact, the whole idea is, what is the belief that I want to be able to have? And then, is there something getting in the way of that?
You're also famous for the levels of change pyramid.
Right.
And
Yes.
how are these levels related to the sleight of mouth and NLP?
Different ways of speaking bring attention to different levels, right? So I can talk about the environment, and when I do, I'm going to use certain kinds of words, descriptive words. But those same words are not going to be the same as if I'm talking about how I think about some things. That's a different type of language. And similarly with belief. So our language, as we said, directs attention to different aspects of this pyramid and connects different aspects of the pyramid, right? So I can have a belief about the environment. I can say this environment is dangerous, right? I can believe, right, this is a dangerous thing. If I believe that, it becomes dangerous, you know. I can believe in, that it's wrong to do something. I can believe it's wrong to think something. So belief can, I can connect different, levels, and I can have beliefs about each of these levels. So I think this is very key. A lot of times, one of the things that you're doing with sleight of mouth, in fact, and when we talk about reframing, I might reframe something from being a judgment about identity. So somebody says, I'm so stupid. You might say, oh, what I hear you saying is that you haven't yet learned how to, do this properly. Well, now you've reframed it, and you've taken something from an identity statement down to a capability statement. And so this is one of the other things you're doing with sleight of mouth, is the type of words that you're choosing and the way that you use them is going to bring attention to, different parts of that pyramid. And again, that's one of the things that can make a huge difference.
What does it mean when you say how words change worlds?
The words themselves are a way of creating, first of all, they're going to shift attention, they're going to shift mindset. So the words themselves are going to determine, again, where energy goes. And if you take this pyramid, if I don't believe that something is important, even if I have the capability to do it, I'm not going to use that capability. If I suddenly believe that that is important, then those capabilities will become naturally engaged. So again, words change worlds because words are going to either expand or restrict our map of the world and our map of what's possible. And by doing so, that's the world that we are going to create. The map is not the territory, but we only have the map to work from. And so if I only have half a map, that's all the territory I'm going to be able to work with. Maybe the simplest way to say it is that because words are one of the key ways that we build our maps of the world, that when you change the map, you change what's possible in the world, right? If it's not in the map, it doesn't exist. As soon as it's in the map, it has that potential to exist.
Who is this for? Who should learn and use sleight of mouth?
I would start by saying what Bandler and Grinder used to answer when they said, who is NLP for? And the term they used is, they said, it's for professional communicators. And professional first, not only, but first. And professional communicators are anybody who makes the majority of their living by communicating, right? By words, by how you speak, and by, which could be obviously anybody from a counselor or a coach to a manager, to a doctor, to a lawyer, or, anybody where my communication is going to make a difference. Now, I think beyond that, as we said, especially because sleight of mouth is around beliefs, it's anybody where belief is going to make a difference in your ability to be successful. So again, any place where words and belief is going to be a difference that makes a difference, that's who it's for. That's who can benefit.
Let's say I have a belief, I've tried everything, but I just can't lose weight, or I'm not good at public speaking, or,
Yeah.
Let's do an example.
Yeah, sure. Let's start with first one. I've tried everything, So first thing you go, oh, I've tried everything, so I can't lose weight. That's a classic belief. First thing I want to do is I don't want to put my attention on this belief itself and try to change the belief. That's actually not what sleight of mouth is about. It's about opening a perspective. In the example I gave with my mother, I never tried to tell her it's wrong to be loyal to your family. That's, that would have been attacking her belief. I want to shift that belief. That's the magic of it. It's this idea of pacing and leading. So somebody like Milton Erickson might say, you're right, you've tried everything, but your unconscious has not. Now, then the person might go, what? So yeah, your cognitive mind, you've tried everything that is in your cognitive map. So sure, of course you're right. But now but just by saying that, you've opened up these other possibilities, right? The reality in terms of how I would be interacting with that person would not simply be, I'd hear the words of their belief and then try to say which sleight of mouth pattern I would use. I would want to say, what's my rapport with this person? What do I know about what they want? And then that's going to tell me which of these patterns could be the most effective.
I'm thrilled to share you with our audience. You're coming to Slovenia in September this year. Can you give us can you give us, Robert, a sneak peek into the sleight of mouth masterclass you're going to be teaching?
Yeah.
What will
I think
participants learn?
masterclass is a good name for it, because what we're going to do is kind of, and in that period, I think what we want to do is to first say that we want to get some of these skills and some of these principles together. We're going to we'll build some of those as foundations. Then we're going to go over what some of the strategies. So, okay, we're not going to necessarily try to, in one day, you can't master all 14 patterns. So what we're going to do is to sort of look at, I'll be having people take some beliefs. We'll do some self-practice on using certain patterns. Then we'll put them in combination, and we'll do a kind of a coaching practice. So we'll be doing some self-practice, some coaching practice. I'll do some demos of how you might use it to do, for example, something like we would call a belief chain to reach a goal. So we'll show our emphasis won't just be on the patterns, it will be on how we can use those to achieve goals that are important in our lives and overcome the obstacles. I mean, so it's getting to the goal and overcoming the obstacle.
So what do you think people will go home with? When they go home, what will they have?
I think they're going to have, I mean, for me, it's kind of like what I was saying of what got me started in NLP to begin with. When I first heard about this meta model, it's like something I can use, right? It's something that I know is going to make a difference. So I want people to, again, walk away with a tool they're going to be able to, that's going to be able to make a difference in their lives. And then, of course, they can also use to support other people. So some sense of both inspiration, but also practical, practical things that they can do.
Robert, how excited are you to come to Slovenia?
Oh, I'm super excited. It's going to be my first time. I've been in a lot of places in the world. This will be my first time to be in Slovenia. And just judging by the kind of conversations that we've had, I'm sure it's going to be very inspirational, very exciting. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Before we end, I'm grateful for your time. How can people follow you? How can people find you?
Well, the simplest ways, I have a website. I think you can get there by just going to robertdilts.com, but it kind of goes to the same place as nlpu.com for NLP University, nlpu.com. There's also diltsstrategygroup.com. These are some of the websites, and that's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
It will be a touching thing to share you with our audience. And, many people will never afford to travel to America or to other places. And you come to Slovenia, and I appreciate it very much. So thank you, Robert.
You're very welcome. All right, Alexander.
Take care.
All right. Have a good night. Thanks for being up so late. I know it's late.
Yeah,
So.
but yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.